children does not bear thinking about. You can't imagine, can you, a baby crying and you cannot give that baby what it needs, which is food or clean water or shelter.
And it goes on all over the world. You know, most of the children in developing countries are in conditions like that and have so little. I went into the bush in Uganda, deep into the bush in a terrible old jeep that we had, and we'd been told that one of the children was not coming to school, and she was a sponsored child, so we needed to find out what was wrong. We got to her home, and it was just two round huts with the straw on the top, and it turned out that she was one of 7 children, and this girl, she was 10 years old, and she had 6 siblings, 2 of whom were 3-month-old twins, and the mother had gone mad and run away. It was just when there'd been a terrible flood. We were going through terrible floods to get to this place, and the father just was doing menial tasks in the fields, but all the plants had rotted because of the floods. Maize and cassava, which are the 2 main plants for food, and he was really struggling. And this little 10-year-old was having to look after all the children, including the twins, which she was holding when we got there, and she was bathing them in a little, basin, metal basin, and you just.
Yes.
How do they survive?
Because if that was going on in the UK, social services would be coming along and,
yes,
pushing them into
So what do you do in that situation? Do you still want that child to get into school?
We were through Global Care, we were able to provide some more help, sometimes grandparents live somewhere around, you can get extended families to do some work.
And train them
and help them, share the children around and provide food. And we were able to do that so that the child was able to come back to school and not have to look after all those children. Age 10.
Yeah. Yes.
You think of a child. I mean, I've got a
10-year-old.
Can you imagine her having to?
No, I can't. I completely. I can't imagine that at all. I think one thing that always concerns me, Fiona, is that ever since I've grown up, I've seen images on the television. And it's always the same images, isn't it? It is the children from the developing world, skin and bone, lying in their mother's arms with flies over their face, with these statistics, a child every 5 seconds.
Doesn't seem to change, does it?
And it doesn't seem to change. And we grow up with these images that they no longer have that ability to shock, do they?
No, because we've seen them so often.
We've seen them so often, and I think in many ways that we've become quite desensitised. I think when I became a mother, the shock element did come back a little bit, because suddenly I was a mother, and then to see these children, that was difficult. Sometimes it's frustrating because you're sitting in your lovely central heated home, surrounded by food, surrounded by luxuries. It comes on the television and your instinct is to turn it off. I know it's going on, but I can't deal with it, because what can I do about it anyway? So
it is very difficult, isn't it?
It is.
We have to live within our own culture. I realise that. And, if we lived in a tin hut or on the pavement, we'd be in trouble.
Yes.
But when you've been to a place and you've seen it and you've lived amongst it and you've seen the deprivation and so on, it never goes away. And I think the people then are motivated enough to keep going and to try and motivate others. But as you say, we can so easily come back to life. We can say, oh, isn't that awful? Then we'll suddenly look at our watch and think, oh no, I've got to make the meal, or I've got to do, and it's over. We don't think about it. But once you're smelling it, you're part of it. I had a really interesting experience because I went to Cambodia and I had to speak at a conference in Thailand on the way, which is South Thailand. So I came to Bangkok.
The shy lady.
This little shy lady who's terrified.
I was going to say, as you do, Fiona, I came to Bangkok. I've never been near Bangkok.
Stopping off along the
Yes,
way.
just stopping for 24 hours. Got to Bangkok, they'd lost my luggage.
Oh.
So they said, never mind, we'll have it for you when you're going to Cambodia, 24 hours time, we'll have it for you by then, we'll sort it out, don't worry. So I thought, oh, okay, 24 hours in the same clothes, fine. Got back to Bangkok the next day, no luggage. So I went on to Cambodia with what I stood up in, no malaria tablets, no mascara, no toothpaste, nothing, just what I stood up in. What am I going to do? And God said to me, Fiona, the people that you're going to work with only ever have what they stand up in. And you know, it was such a challenge to me. It was so humbling. I had 2 weeks in the same clothes. I mean, I could wash some of them out overnight because it was very warm. But I could throw them away when I got home.
But that was
But they're still there.
I think if God has sent you there, He's going to protect you, isn't He?
Yes, but it wasn't that, it was the lesson that
Yes,
I learned
yes.
with just having what I stood up in.
And that's normal
we were
for them.
working on a rubbish dump too, so it wasn't very pleasant. But I mean,
Wow.
these experiences are just life-changing. And once you've done them, then, I mean, I can never stop trying to promote what's being done in order to make people more aware of the needs.
Other than praying, what can we do? Because prayers are powerful, they work, God hears them, He answers them, but should we do more?
Well, one of the things that I always feel is totally helpless. I haven't got millions of pounds, you know, to give away to various charities. I do what I can, and I try and be as aware as possible. But I remember one of Mother Teresa's comments. She said, how do we change the world? One life at a time.
So true.
And we can't do everything, but we can do a little bit that can make a difference. And when I came on the train to come here this morning, I got myself a coffee at the station to drink on the train. That cost me £2.50. If I refrained from 2 of those a week, it would enable me to sponsor a child.
Yeah.
That's quite...
It's not
Yeah.
very
No,
much,
it's not.
and it
No.
can make a difference. And I've
Yes.
seen the difference that it's made to my sponsored children. I mean, I still had my cup of coffee. but what I want to say is that it, you know, we
It's
can
doable.
think about it. It
Yes.
isn't much in by our standards, is it? If we think about that.
No, it's not.
And it would be quite good to fast from coffee.
Yes, and the rewards, it's such a rewarding feeling it must be, knowing Maureen is a chef, you know, and that you have seen her through her schooling. And
It's only
everything
one
else.
child, though.
But it's a
You know
life.
what? But it does
But it's
make
a life, and
difference,
to that
yes.
one child, it's everything, isn't
Yes.
it? That's
And the ripples
thing.
can keep going out.
Exactly.
Yes.
Do you think it's been more of a therapy, throwing yourself into your charity work with losing Roy, and then there's you on your own, having to hold the fort? Do you feel it has been a therapy for you?
I think so. I mean, not consciously,
Right.
but I've always said to people who go through bereavement, get yourself back out into the world as soon as possible, because the longer you sit behind closed doors and dark curtains, you know,
Yes.
the harder it is to
Okay.
get out again.
Yes.
And I never had a minute. And I'm so grateful that I've still got a purpose at my age, that I'm not sitting knitting. If you saw my knitting, you'd realise why.
But that's another issue, isn't it, though, Fiona, that I was saying to you, that we get lots of emails from people, particularly on programmes like She Matters and sort of the daytime sort of women's programmes, of mothers at home saying, I'm at home, I've got the children, my self-esteem's taken a knock, I just don't feel that there's any purpose in my life. And it can be a bit gloomy. Equally, at the other end of the spectrum, a lot of, people coming up for retirement who really feel that retirement means the end of life.
Well, it isn't.
Well, we can see that through you.
I should be on retirement, but I couldn't do it. But as far as mothers go, I'm passionate about promoting mothers and making them feel good about themselves. I think what I went through in terms of my self-esteem being low and, sense of failure, is what many of us as women go through. Even the most successful ones, I think, inside feel as if they're not matching up, if, they have low self-esteem. But I always want to tell mothers that it's the most important job that they will ever do, to bring up the next generation of secure adults. There's nothing more important than that. And yet they get maligned, they get sidetracked, you know. They're just, oh, do you work? No, you're just a housewife, you're just a mother. You haven't got any value. But I used to notice that it was only if a job wasn't done that I would get noticed. I never got praised because I always had clean clothes on the beds for the children on a Monday morning, or that everything was ready, or their packed lunches were ready, or their breakfast was on the table. That was taken for granted. If it wasn't, where is it? Well, I've got to go on this.
That's
you know,
right.
the only time you get noticed is if something isn't done.
Yes.
And a lot of the stuff that we do as mothers is very boring. It's very repetitive.
It's
and
so important.
It's so important.
And yet, in some ways, it's lovely that our children do take it for granted, and they do expect their mothers to provide in that way for them. Because I think, you know, as a foster carer who steps into that role of a mother figure, so many children that come into care haven't had that either, and they don't take it for granted, and they don't expect it either. They don't expect you to actually look after them, feed them, wash their clothes for them. And
It's a security, isn't it,
It
that our
is.
children have.
And in many ways, that is exactly how we should be looking at our relationship with our Heavenly Father, that
He will look after us.
He will look after us. And that actually we don't need to be worrying about our provision for our lives, because He's our dad and He's going to do it anyway, you know,
Absolutely.
which is a lovely thing. There was another statistic that I read in the book. I could sit and talk to you all day, Fiona. How many hours have you got?
It's only a coffee table book. You could read it in half an hour.
You've written 11 books, haven't you?
Something like
Is
that.
that? Or
yes.
maybe more.
Some of the pictures are really heartbreaking, and there's one here, Romania, of a child in a cot, and it just says, and the most important piece of clothing you must wear is love. Love what binds us together in perfect harmony, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. Colossians 3:14-15. And
That's lovely. That book's got scripture going through it as well.
it is. It's a
Yeah.
lovely book because it's got pictures in it, it's got quotes, testimonies, but it says here, over 9 million children under 5 die every year. Most of these deaths occur in 2 regions, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In industrialised countries, which is us here, the figure was just 100,000. 9 million children. That's 9 million families.
But I think, like Fiona said, if we think of one child, because
Yes.
that's 2 above us, isn't it? It's too big.
I
for
can't.
One child.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
you can't take it in, can
No.
you? The thought of that
No.
many people. If you think of how many people live in London, for instance,
Yes,
and then think about 9 million children
yes.
dying unnecessarily, many of them unnecessarily, as we've said, from
Yes.
diseases that if we could inoculate them or give them treatment, they wouldn't suffer at all.
No. So what other work does the charity do in the countries? Is there sort of building work? Do they sort of help build?
Schools, they do schools, they've got
Hospitals?
orphanages. They don't do hospitals,
Okay.
no, but mostly, for instance, in Romania, they've had the Home of Hope. And these children, picture you saw there, of children who were just lying in cots in terrible conditions, they were all told that they were all ineducable. And now they're sort of 18, 19 and 20, and they've got university degrees, and they're out there, they've got work, and some of them are just finishing school and so on. And we've provided apartments for them so that they can live still with a bit of security once they're out of the orphanage.
Yes.
But they were given so much love by the mamas who
Oh,
looked after them
Isn't
in
that
the
wonderful?
orphanage.
My sister actually adopted from Romania.
Really?
Becky was 4 months old when she was
Oh.
brought, and seeing the images in the book of the children. I won't hold it up to the camera because it will be so small that you won't be able to see it.
I'll
at
have to
home,
buy the
but-
book.
Exactly.
Buy the book, yes.
But certainly seeing that, those images, that was Becky. exactly the same, lying in a cot, abandoned. She's 21